Pakistan's army chief has been in contact all night with the U.S. Vice President, the U.S. Special Envoy, and Iran's foreign minister simultaneously. Pakistan's foreign minister flew to Beijing with a hairline fracture in his shoulder because he considered the trip too urgent to postpone, and a proposed deal being called the Islamabad Accord is now sitting on the desks of both Washington and Tehran. The country that most people associate with its own internal crises is now the single bridge between two nations threatening to destroy each other. And the reason Pakistan ended up in this position tells you more about the state of global diplomacy than anything either side has said publicly. To understand why Pakistan, you need to understand who couldn't do it. Before the war, U.S.-Iran negotiations were mediated primarily by Oman and Qatar. Both countries are in the Persian Gulf. Both have been hit by Iranian missiles and drones since the fighting started. Oman's foreign minister, who brokered the pre-war nuclear talks and said peace was within reach days before the strikes began, watched his diplomatic work get destroyed overnight. Qatar's Ras Laffan facility, one of the world's largest LNG terminals, was struck by Iranian missiles. You can't mediate a war between two countries when one of them is bombing your infrastructure. Oman and Qatar are out. Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Turkey are involved in the diplomatic push, but none of them have the same access to both sides. Saudi Arabia is actively urging Trump to continue the war. Turkey has its own complicated relationship with Iran. Egypt is a messenger, not a mediator. Pakistan is the only country with direct access to both the American leadership and the Iranian leadership at the same time. That's not a small thing. That's the entire reason this matters. The access runs deep on both sides. Pakistan's army chief, Field Marshal Asim Munir, has a working relationship with President Trump and his inner circle. Pakistan's civilian leadership has cultivated ties with the Trump administration over the past year. On the Iranian side, Pakistan shares a 900-kilometer border with Iran. It has, by some estimates, the second largest Shia Muslim population in the world after Iran, giving it cultural and religious credibility that no Western or Arab mediator can match. Iran negotiated a deal with Pakistan to allow 20 Pakistani-flagged ships through the Strait of Hormuz, 2 per day, while the rest of the world's shipping remains blocked. That's not something Iran does for a country it doesn't trust. Iran's President Pezeshkian personally called Pakistan's Prime Minister to praise his country's supportive role for peace, and this role isn't new for Pakistan. Islamabad facilitated the contacts between the Afghan Taliban and Washington that led to the Doha talks and the 2020 agreement, which ultimately set the stage for the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. Before that, Pakistan was a key interlocutor in the 1988 Geneva Accords that helped end the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. When it comes to brokering between powers that refuse to speak directly, Pakistan has done this before. The proposal Pakistan has put forward is a two-phase framework. Phase 1 is a 45-day ceasefire during which the Strait of Hormuz would begin reopening and negotiations on a permanent settlement would take place. Phase 2 is the permanent deal itself, expected to include Iranian commitments not to pursue nuclear weapons in exchange for sanctions relief and the release of frozen assets. The final agreement would be signed in Islamabad. But Iran rejected the first phase. Tehran's position is clear. A temporary ceasefire only gives the U.S. and Israel time to regroup, resupply, and prepare for the next round of strikes. An analysis by IRGC linked media put it bluntly. Any pause that does not meet Tehran's conditions would allow Washington and Israel to recover from battlefield pressure, ease ammunition shortages, and continue extracting military and economic advantages while keeping Iran under threat. Iran wants a permanent end to the war with guarantees that it won't resume, compensation for the damage caused by 5 weeks of strikes, and recognition of its sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. A 45-day pause doesn't give them any of that. And the U.S. hasn't formally responded to Pakistan's plan either. Trump called it a significant step, but not good enough. So the mediator has a proposal that neither side has accepted. Here's the detail that I think makes this story bigger than the negotiations themselves. Pakistan's foreign minister didn't just shuttle between Washington and Tehran. He flew to Beijing. And the reason, according to former U.S. State Department official Vali Nasser, is that Iran has asked for a guarantor for any potential deal. Not an American guarantee, not a European one, a Chinese one. Pakistan went to China to ask whether Beijing would underwrite the agreement. China's foreign ministry responded by publicly backing Pakistan's mediation and saying it welcomes all efforts conducive to peace. But welcoming efforts and guaranteeing a deal are two very different things. If China agrees to act as guarantor, it means Beijing becomes a formal stakeholder in the post-war Middle East order. That's a structural shift in how the region works. For decades, the U.S. has been the sole security guarantor in the Gulf. If this deal requires Chinese backing to hold, that era is over. There's also a dimension to this that most Western coverage has missed. Pakistan isn't doing this purely out of goodwill. The war directly threatens Pakistan's economy. Pakistan imports about 80% of its energy from the Gulf. Diesel prices are climbing. The wheat harvest starts in April, and combine harvesters, tractors, and freight trucks all run on diesel that comes through supply chains connected to the Gulf. One Pakistani analyst warned that trucking costs are already climbing and will feed into the price of everything from flour to fertilizer in the coming weeks. If the Strait of Hormuz stays closed through the planting season, Pakistan faces a food security crisis on top of the energy crisis it's already managing. Mediation isn't charity, it's survival. Pakistan needs this war to end more urgently than almost any country not directly involved in the fighting. The picture that emerges is this. The traditional mediators are sidelined because they're under fire. The country that started the war is setting deadlines it keeps extending. The country being bombed is demanding guarantees from a third power. And the bridge between all of them is a nation of 240 million people that most geopolitical analysis treats as an afterthought. Pakistan has no aircraft carriers. It has no permanent seat on the UN Security Council. It has no veto power. What it has is something none of the major powers currently possess, the trust of both sides at the same time. And in a war where the US and Iran refuse to speak directly, that trust is the most valuable diplomatic asset on earth right now. Pakistan's army chief spent the night on the phone with both sides of a war while his foreign minister flew to Beijing with a fractured shoulder to ask China to guarantee the peace. One Pakistani official described the situation as essentially a schoolboy brawl that they're trying to break up. Whether they succeed may depend less on what Washington or Tehran decides and more on whether Beijing picks up the phone.